Have you ever wondered why we give human names to something as destructive as a hurricane? You hear about Hurricane Katrina, Hurricane Andrew, Hurricane Ian. But why not Hurricane Blob or Storm to 3B? It seems a bit strange, right? Well, today we're re-diving deep into the fascinating history and the surprisingly organized system behind how hurricanes get their names. Trust me, it's a story full of meteorologists, military pilots, and a little bit of gender politics. So, buckle up, because this is a whirlwind of a tale. Let's rewind the clock a bit. For centuries, people didn't have a formal system. Hurricanes were often named after the saint's day on which they occurred. For example, there was the San Felipe hurricane in 1876 and another San Felipe hurricane in 1928 that both hit Puerto Rico on September 13th. You can already see the problem, right? It gets confusing really fast, especially when you're trying to keep track of historical data or issue clear warnings. Imagine trying to explain which San Felipe storm you're talking about. It was messy and inefficient. Then, in the late 19th century, an Australian meteorologist named Clement Wragg started naming tropical cyclones. He began by using letters of the Greek alphabet, then moved on to Polynesian mythology, and eventually he started naming them after politicians he disliked. Can you imagine? It was his way of saying that a particular politician was causing great distress and wandering aimlessly about the Pacific. It was cheeky, but it didn't really catch on as a global standard. The practice we're familiar with today really started to take shape during World War II. Air Force and Navy meteorologists flying missions in the Pacific needed a clear, quick way to refer to the massive storms they were tracking. These were often missions to track typhoons in the Western Pacific. They started informally naming storms after their wives or girlfriends back home. It was a personal, easy-to-remember system that worked well for their internal communications. It was simple, unambiguous, and a lot more memorable than a string of coordinates. This informal military practice caught on. By 1953, the United States decided to make it official and began using a list of female names for storms in the Atlantic Basin. This was the birth of the modern naming convention. For the first time, the public started hearing storm warnings using names like Alice, Barbara, and Carol. This made storms much easier to discuss in media reports and public safety announcements. Instead of a complex jumble of latitude and longitude, people could latch on to a simple human name, which dramatically improved communication and public awareness. But why only female names? Well, for a while, that was just the way it was done, likely stemming from the naval tradition of referring to ships as she. However, as you can imagine, this didn't sit well with everyone. By the 1970s, there was a growing movement advocating for gender equality, and the female lonely naming convention came under scrutiny. Many felt it was sexist to associate destructive storms exclusively with women. Activists like Roxy Bolton led a vocal campaign against the practice, arguing that women deeply resent being arbitrarily associated with disaster. Their efforts paid off. In 1979, the World Meteorological Organization and the U.S. National Weather Service finally revised the system. They began to include men's names in the lists, alternating between male and female names. So, you'd get a storm named Albert, followed by Beryl, then Chris, and so on. This is the system we still use today. It's a much fairer and more balanced approach, and it all happened because people spoke up and pushed for change. So, who actually creates these lists of names? It's not just a random draw. For the Atlantic Ocean, there's a strict procedure managed by the World Meteorological Organization, or WMO. They have 6 lists of names that they rotate every 6 years. Each list has 21 names, starting with A and going to W, but skipping Q, U, X, Y, and Z, because there aren't enough common names that start with those letters. So, the list of names used in 2024 will be used again in 2030. The 2025 list will reappear in 2031, and so on. The names on the list are chosen to be familiar to the people in the regions affected by the storms. That's why the Atlantic lists include English, Spanish, and French names, reflecting the languages spoken around the Atlantic basin. For example, you'll see names like Danielle and Gaston alongside Hermine and Ian. It is all about making the names relatable and easy to understand for everyone in the path of the storm. The primary goal is clarity and quick communication, especially during a crisis. Now, what happens if a storm is so deadly or destructive that its future use would be insensitive? This is where the concept of retiring a name comes in. If a hurricane causes significant loss of life or property, the WMO will vote to retire its name from all future lists. This is a sign of respect for the victims and survivors. The retired name is then replaced by a new name that starts with the same letter. For instance, after Hurricane Katrina devastated New Orleans in 2005, the name Katrina was permanently retired. It was replaced with the name Katia on the list. The same happened with Sandy in 2012, which was replaced by Sarah, and more recently, Ida in 2021 was retired and replaced by Amani. It's a way of immortalizing the impact of these catastrophic events, ensuring that the name itself becomes a part of history forever linked to that specific, devastating storm. Over 90 hurricane names have been retired from the Atlantic list since this practice began. And here is another interesting question. What happens if we have a super active hurricane season and run through all 21 names on the list? This has actually happened a couple of times, most famously in the record-breaking 2005 season and again in 2020. 4 years. The backup plan was to use the letters of the Greek alphabet: alpha, beta, gamma, and so on. However, after the 2020 season, the WMO decided to stop using the Greek alphabet. They found that it created its own set of problems. For one, the names could be confusing. For example, zeta, eta, and theta sound very similar, which isn't ideal when you're trying to communicate clear warnings. Also, the focus on the Greek letter often distracted from the actual storm's impact. So, the WMO created a supplemental list of regular names to be used if the main list is exhausted. This way, the naming stays consistent, clear, and focused on public safety. So, there you have it. From saints' days and spiteful meteorologists to military sweethearts and a push for gender equality, the history of naming hurricanes is surprisingly rich and complex. It's not just about picking a random name. It's a carefully managed international system designed for one primary purpose: to save lives by making it easier to communicate warnings and track these powerful forces of nature. Using a simple name makes a storm instantly recognizable and helps to deliver critical information clearly and effectively. It's a small detail that makes a huge difference when a monster storm is on the horizon. I hope you found that as fascinating as I did. It really shows how even something as simple as a name can have a deep and important story behind it. What are some of the most memorable hurricane names you can think of? Let me know down in the comments below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed this deep dive and want to learn more cool stories about how our world works, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Don't forget to ring the notification bell so you won't miss our next video. Stay curious, stay safe, and I'll see you in the next one.